There's a peculiar thing I've noticed in the way we behave around each other. It's not the overtly malicious gestures, the loud insults, or the blatant betrayals we need to watch out for. No, those are the easy ones to spot. The real trouble lies in the subtler, quieter forces that move within our hearts. Those shadows that lurk just beyond the edge of our awareness. Have you ever wondered, as you listen to the idle chatter of friends or the well-meaning advice of family, whether there might be more at play than simple concern or care? What if beneath the surface, in the midst of what seems like everyday conversation, there is a more sinister force creeping into our thoughts, subtly altering how we think and what we value? Imagine you are in the midst of a perfectly ordinary conversation with someone you love. They talk about a neighbor, a colleague, or perhaps a relative, and at first it seems harmless, just another topic of gossip or some casual reflection. But what if, with each passing word, the spirit of envy begins to simmer? What if the judgments grow sharper, the comparisons more pointed? Why do they have that and not you? The conversation whispers. Wouldn't you be happier if you had more? Could it be that something far darker is twisting these innocent words into something that unsettles the soul? These aren't just the thoughts of a normal person. They are whispers, hints that feed on our insecurities, nudging us to covet, to feel inadequate, to break down what is pure in our relationships. What if the next time you're at a gathering, a quiet suggestion comes from a loved one? Maybe you should just do what everyone else is doing. It's easier that way. On the surface, it might seem pragmatic, even wise. After all, who doesn't want an easier path? But beneath this advice, have you ever stopped to ask yourself, what's being asked of me here? Is it true freedom I'm being offered, or a life shaped by the approval of others? Why does this voice want me to blend in, to forego my individuality, to lose my spark of uniqueness for the sake of conformity? Or what about when we begin to notice that even the most caring gestures, the ones that seem so selfless at first, are somehow not quite right? The overt kindness that becomes a quiet demand, the generosity that expects something in return, the sympathy that feels more like an obligation than a comfort. Could this soft manipulation, hidden behind the veil of affection, be the hand of something more insidious? What does it mean when love begins to feel like a transaction? What does it mean when you're made to feel that your worth is tied not to who you are, but to what you can give? Let's take a moment and ask ourselves, what happens when someone's words and actions, though wrapped in the mask of goodwill, start to plant seeds of doubt, resentment, or shame in your heart? What do we do when, without realizing it, we let those seeds grow into full-blown fears? Fears about our relationships, our choices, our worth. When did you begin to believe that your dreams were too small, too insignificant? When did you let someone else's disapproval or quiet criticism redefine your own sense of self? And why is it that so often we do this in silence, thinking that if we just ignore the discomfort, it will pass? Perhaps the most chilling part of this is that we don't always notice these small, creeping transformations in ourselves or others. We look at each other and we think, but this is just how they are. This is just part of who they've always been. But what if what we call just them is actually something more sinister at play? What if we've become so accustomed to these subtle distortions, we no longer recognize them for what they are? When did we lose sight of the truth? That love should not twist us into something lesser, that kindness should not feel like an obligation, that friendship should not whisper doubts into our hearts. So, the next time you find yourself questioning a thought, a feeling, or an interaction with someone close to you, pause, look deeper. Listen not just with your ears, but with your heart. What kind of spirit is in this moment? Is it one that invites growth, that fosters peace and understanding, that lifts you up? Or is it one that seeks to divide, to isolate, to diminish? Recognizing these whispers, these shadows, is no easy task. But once we start, we may just begin to see the true nature of what's been shaping our lives all along. As we move through life, there are moments when you find yourself in a room, surrounded by people you trust, and yet there's a lingering sense of discomfort. The air may feel thick with expectations, or the words that are exchanged between smiles may seem more like veiled criticisms. Have you ever been in a conversation where, instead of feeling encouraged or supported, you leave with the subtle weight of self-doubt resting on your shoulders? It's almost imperceptible at first. A passing comment that seems harmless, an innocent question that somehow makes you question your decisions. But these are not simply innocent exchanges. They are small, insidious shifts, like tiny cracks appearing in a perfectly smooth surface, unnoticed until the whole structure begins to falter. What is it that makes these subtle influences so difficult to recognize? Why do we let them seep into our lives almost unknowingly? Perhaps it's because they come disguised in such familiar forms. They wear the faces of friends and family, those we trust the most. They wrap themselves in the comforting language of care, protection, and concern. Who would question the advice of someone who loves you? And yet, behind the words, beneath the well-meaning gestures, there may be an agenda, a quiet push towards something less than genuine. Does that not cause us to wonder, when we look into the eyes of those closest to us, whether we are truly seeing them, or whether we are seeing a reflection of what they wish us to believe? Consider for a moment the subtle sway of flattery. We've all experienced it. Those compliments that feel a little too perfect, too orchestrated. You're the best at this, they say. No one does it like you. And at first it feels good, doesn't it? Who doesn't want to be appreciated, to feel seen? But what if, under the surface, this praise is not so much a celebration of your unique qualities, but a gentle nudge toward a role, a position that is more about maintaining an image than fostering your true self? Flattery, when it is too excessive, too persistent, can sometimes be a tool to bind you in a particular way of thinking. It can reinforce a role that, in truth, keeps you small, keeps you confined to an ideal that others have created for you. Why do we let these masks slip past our defenses without question? And then there's the quiet, insidious force of fear. Fear is one of the most effective ways of keeping someone under control, of twisting them into the shape of something less than they are. We've all encountered it in one form or another. It might show up as the carefully planted seeds of worry about what others think, the underlying fear of rejection, or the uncertainty about whether your choices will be met with approval. It's the voice that says, if you do this, will they still love you? If you go down that path, what will they say? What is this voice really? And why does it hold such power over us? Is it not a force that seeks to keep us from growing, from becoming who we are meant to be? When you feel that pang of hesitation, that moment when you stop and wonder whether your choices will be met with judgment, ask yourself, where is this fear coming from? Is it a genuine concern for my well-being? Or is it something else, something darker, whispering that I am not enough as I am? Why is it that we often measure our actions by the fear of how others will perceive us, rather than by the authenticity of our own hearts? Could it be that the subtle demons we face do not reside in the form of great catastrophes, but in these quiet, unnoticed moments of doubt? It is in these spaces, the quiet whispers, the gentle pulls, that the true battle lies, not the battle we wage in grand gestures or loud confrontations, but the one that rages in the silence between words, in the pauses between the moments we share. The battle to keep our minds and hearts clear, to resist the forces that would shape us into something less than we are meant to be. How often do we fail to notice these forces because they come clothed in familiarity, dressed in the garb of affection and care? And how often, when we are caught up in them, do we forget that we have the power to resist? What would it take for us to stand, not in defiance of each other, but in defense of our own souls, our own authenticity? So the question remains, can we see it? Can we recognize the quiet demons, the subtle shifts, before they take root in our hearts and minds? Or will we continue to let them pass, unnoticed, until they've woven their influence so deeply into our lives that we no longer remember who we were before they came? We are often so caught up in the noise of daily life, the rush of tasks, the need to please, the pull of social obligations, that we forget to stop and take a moment to really look at the people around us, yes, but more importantly, look at the forces that move within us. How many times have you felt a pull in a certain direction, an instinct to say something, do something, or act in a way that doesn't quite sit right? At first, you may brush it off, dismiss it as a passing thought or an emotion that will fade with time. But what if it's not simply a fleeting moment? What if it's a gentle tug, a hidden force that knows exactly how to prey on your vulnerabilities, your fears, your desires? Have you ever noticed how, when you're uncertain or feeling vulnerable, it becomes easier to be swayed by the opinions of others? When the winds of doubt blow through your life, it's almost as if you become more susceptible to the quiet manipulation of those around you. It's not the obvious pressures, the overt demands, but the subtle ones, the quiet insinuations that perhaps you're not good enough, not wise enough, or not strong enough to stand alone. Why does this feel so convincing at times? Is it not because we have allowed ourselves to be too reliant on external validation, too eager to seek approval from those around us? The demon here, if we can call it that, is not in the form of an obvious foe, but in the comfort we've allowed ourselves to take in the approval of others. It is a quiet compromise that slowly erodes the sense of self. And how often do we place others' happiness above our own, believing that it is a mark of love or loyalty? The seemingly harmless act of bending ourselves to another's will, of sacrificing our own desires for the sake of those we care about, seems noble at first, but the danger lies in the fact that, eventually, we begin to lose sight of our own voice. We begin to believe that our purpose, our worth, lies only in our ability to make others happy. Have you ever felt this creeping sense that you are only as valuable as what you can give, as what you can offer to others? That the demands of love require you to empty yourself for the sake of others, and in doing so you no longer know what remains of you? Perhaps it is because, deep down, we fear being misunderstood or unloved. But what if this fear, the very thing that drives us to mold ourselves into what we think others want, was itself a whispering force, calling us to give away pieces of ourselves until there's nothing left? Why do we fear standing in our own truth, even if it might mean standing alone? What if the love that demands you to lose yourself isn't love at all, but a subtle coercion, a quiet pull towards self-doubt? The question we must ask ourselves is simple, yet profound. How much of what we do in the name of love and friendship is truly for the other person, and how much is simply a way of filling the empty spaces in our own souls, of quieting our own fears? There are, no doubt, many moments when we feel the weight of these subtle shifts, these small influences, but how often do we pause to ask, where is this coming from? Where is this need to please, this urge to conform, this pressure to be what others expect of me really originating? And why do I allow it to take root in my life? Are we so accustomed to these forces that we no longer recognize them for what they are? Perhaps we are too afraid of standing firm in our own selves, too afraid to confront the discomfort of being fully present, fully known, without the validation of others. And yet, there are moments, rare, precious moments, when we catch a glimpse of truth, when the quiet whisper of clarity cuts through the fog. It's then that we see how easily we've been shaped, how much we've allowed ourselves to be manipulated by forces we never quite understood. It's then that we can feel, deep in our hearts, that we are more than the sum of others' expectations. But the question remains, how do we find the strength to resist the pull? How do we recognize the subtle demons at play when they are so deeply woven into the fabric of our relationships, our habits, and our thoughts? How do we begin to unravel the threads that have bound us to this unseen force without losing the connections we hold dear? What is it that we must look for, truly look for, to recognize when we have been led astray by these invisible hands, guiding us without our knowing? It's in the moments of quiet reflection, the sudden awareness that something is not quite right, that we begin to see them for what they are. But do we have the courage to act? Do we have the resolve to stand firm in the face of these quiet, insidious pressures that ask us to become less than we are? What if we have become so accustomed to these subtle manipulations that we no longer even see them as manipulations at all? Have we forgotten that we are not meant to live as reflections of others, bending and shifting with each passing expectation, but as beings who are whole in our own right? Perhaps, when we ask ourselves the tough questions, why do I feel this way, or why am I sacrificing so much of myself, we'll begin to see where the threads of influence have been woven into the very fabric of our thinking. But can we trust ourselves to recognize these moments for what they are? It's astonishing how often we let the tiniest doubts, those almost imperceptible shifts in how we perceive ourselves, slide past without notice. We hear a passing comment or feel the weight of an unspoken expectation, and we assume it's nothing, just a fleeting thought. But what if these small, almost invisible changes are the true battlegrounds? What if we could trace back every moment of self-doubt, every decision made not from our own sense of clarity but from the fear of judgment, to these quiet whispers? Do we realize how much of our actions have been shaped not by our own desires, but by the subtle hand of external pressures? There are moments when we feel the heat of judgment, the cold edge of disapproval from those we care about. It's not always a glaring condemnation, sometimes it's the absence of support, the faint sense that our choices don't quite match the expectations others have of us. And yet, why do we feel the need to seek that approval, as though our worth is tied to their perception of us? What is it about us that allows these invisible forces, these quiet demons, to carry so much weight? Why do we let them rewrite the story of who we are, of what we could be, with such ease? And think about this. How often do we look around us and see people shaping themselves into something else simply because they are afraid? Afraid of what their friends will think, afraid of what their family will say, afraid of being different. Isn't it curious that the very forces that seek to constrain us are not always outside of us, but are often reflections of the very fears and insecurities we carry within? Perhaps the real struggle isn't against an external enemy at all, but against the internal voices, the voices of fear, the voices of doubt, the voices that whisper that we are not enough, as we are. These voices can sound so convincing, so familiar, that we almost believe them to be the truth. But what if they are not? What if, in truth, they are the ones that need to be questioned? We have all experienced moments where we feel overwhelmed by the weight of the world's expectations. We see others around us succeeding, making choices that seem so effortlessly right, and we wonder why we can't seem to get it together. Could this comparison, this quiet yearning to match others' achievements or lives, be one of the strongest tools in the hands of the subtle forces we face? It is a tool that makes us forget our own unique path, our own worth, and our own definition of success. Have you ever stopped to ask yourself, why do I measure my progress by someone else's yardstick? And what do I lose in the process? This is the quiet nature of the forces we must confront. They do not always scream, they whisper, they nudge, they mold our thoughts slowly and gently. They don't come in sudden, grand gestures. They arrive in small, almost imperceptible ways, lulling us into compliance, convincing us that we are not enough unless we meet certain standards. Why is it that we so easily forget that we are worthy of being loved, worthy of being seen as we are without needing to meet anyone else's version of what we should be? And why is it that when we do recognize these subtle shifts, we so often dismiss them, thinking them unimportant, thinking they are too small to matter? Could this, in fact, be the greatest deception of all, that the small, seemingly insignificant moments are the ones that carry the most weight in shaping who we become? So we come to a place of reckoning. The quiet demons that whisper, that shape our thoughts and actions with such subtlety, are not invincible. They may hide in the corners of our conversations, in the shadows of our fears, but they are not the ultimate truth. They are the distractions, the illusion, the forces that would keep us from remembering who we truly are. And yet, we have the power to recognize them. We have the power to listen, to pause, and to choose to stand firm in our authenticity. The true battle is not one fought outside ourselves, but within. It is a battle to reclaim our own worth, to remember that we do not need to bend to others' expectations to be loved or valued. It is a battle to resist the quiet whispers that would have us doubt our purpose and our place in this world. The strength we need to resist these forces lies not in being perfect, but in being real, in being courageous enough to follow our own path, even when it seems lonely or uncertain. So the question is, will you listen to the whispers of doubt or fear of conformity, or will you listen to the voice within you, the voice that reminds you of your own worth, your own power, your own unique journey? The demons may whisper, but you do not have to follow. The truth is louder, clearer, and more powerful than any fear or manipulation. Stand in it, own it, and let it guide you through the noise, the pressure, and the subtle forces that seek to shape you into something less than you are meant to be.